Well before Muhammad Ali was astonishing spectators by dancing around the ring like a lightweight, there was another heavyweight whose mastery of footwork seemed to defy gravity. That man was heavyweight champion, Jersey Joe Walcott. Walcott fought with his hands low, content to leave his head a wide open target to some of the heaviest hitters in the history of combat sports. Crafty and creative, Walcott used a multitude of feints, draws, and rhythm manipulations to set traps and lead opponents into his punches. Recently, his distinctive sidesteps, slips, and counters have seen a resurgence among a few gifted modern fighters. One thing that permeated Jersey Joe's entire style was broken rhythm. Every fighter has a distinctive tempo and rhythm from which he prefers to fight. For instance, notice the difference between Joe Louis's slow, steady, and methodical pace, and Walcott's jerking, choppy steps and head movement. Louis liked to stay in a consistent, reliable rhythm for which he could set up his powerful offense, while in contrast, Walcott broke his rhythm every chance he got, pausing on the half beat to feint or suddenly change directions. Fighting on the half beat means breaking the rhythm that you've established and which your opponent has become accustomed to. Instead of continuing with your established tempo, you suddenly break your timing and hit in between the beats. Here Walcott pulls off this technique against Rocky Marciano, breaking his head movement on the half beat to change direction and leaving Marciano swinging at air. Walcott was also a master at playing with cadence, slowing down the speed of his movement until his opponent was fully committed to following, and then skillfully upping his cadence to move off angle. Here he does the same while weaving, waiting until Marciano takes the bait to up his cadence and beat him to the punch. Another rhythm manipulation that Walcott enjoyed confusing his competitors with was a technique known as a stutter. Put simply, a stutter is a small pause or break in a fighter's rhythm used to catch a competitor by surprise, ruining his coordination and making him hesitant to attack. Notice Walcott's brief pause before nailing Charles with the hard jab. For a great example on how to stutter your jabs effectively, check out Mayweather's fight against Canelo. In the best case scenario, an opponent will block on the stutter ahead of the actual punch, and then get caught as they withdraw their hand back to guard. Walcott used the same concept with not only his punches, but his footwork and head movement as well, pausing mid-motion and leaving his opponent guessing whether he would continue his movement or change directions entirely. It's these techniques that allowed Walcott to stand squared up with his hands low in front of Joe Louis and dodge each of his punches simply through sidestepping. Combined with intelligent footwork and head movement, Walcott used his timing to consistently outwit his competitors. In this clip, Walcott establishes a pattern by slipping to dull Louis's reaction to his movements, and then repeats the sequence a moment later, slightly altering his timing to catch Louis with a hard lead hook. From long range, Walcott used subtle sidesteps to unsettle his competitors' balance and keep them from setting. Stepping back just out of punching range, Walcott compelled the opponents to overreach, and then sidestepped offline to force them to readjust their center line. By breaking his rhythm, feinting, and mixing up his footwork, Walcott drew his opponents into chasing him, and then took advantage of the opening he had created. Here Walcott conditions Joe Louis to try and cut off the ring with lateral movement. Louis expects Walcott to once again step offline, but Louis's jab hits only air. Walcott instead sinks his weight and fires. Walcott would sometimes take things one step further by switching stances as he danced around the ring, alternating between an absurdly forward neutral stance and a narrow southpaw stance. The wide neutral stance let Walcott enjoy more lateral movement, and the narrow southpaw stance allowed a wider range of head movement and easier exits to the inside. Just like Willie Pep, Walcott used these circling footwork patterns with shifts to load up punches and lead his opponents directly into his attacks. But tricky footwork was just one piece of Jersey Joe's repertoire. Walcott was even more gifted at head movement, which he used offensively as well as defensively. Offensive head movement in this context does not mean headbutts. Check out the previous video on Burmese boxing for more on those. Instead, Walcott used head movement offensively by using head feints. In the same way that foot feints can create openings by tricking opponents into believing an attack is coming when it's not, Walcott used head movement to sell certain punches. When Walcott suddenly moved his head offline, his opponents assumed that he was attempting to stay safe while throwing a punch. This had the added benefit of loading his punch on the opposite side, where his opponent's overreaction had just created an opening. Here Walcott strolls up to Marciano, establishing a rhythm. He then leans inside, prompting Marciano to defend against an incoming cross by jabbing and catching with his rear hand. But Marciano's block has left the side of his head open, and Walcott breaks his rhythm in the half beat to throw a lead hook. In this clip, Walcott moves offline to the inside, prompting Lewis to defend against a punch that isn't coming. This lets Walcott get one step ahead, and he changes course on the half beat. Notice that Lewis is still ducking while Walcott has already changed direction, allowing him to slam a lead hook into Lewis's temple and follow up with a hard right to his jaw. He then performs this exact same trick again, ducking low outside and then weaving inside, drawing a lead hook from Lewis. But Walcott breaks his rhythm on the half beat once again, beating Lewis's hook with his own and staying far enough ahead in the exchange to duck away from Lewis's follow-up. These 1.5 beat feints were a staple of Walcott's style, setting up numerous opportunities from which he countered. Which leads us to one of the most beautiful knockouts of all time. In his third fight against Charles, Walcott casually strolled up like he was taking a walk in the park, smoothly slipped Charles' jab, and returned a terrifying left to knock Charles out cold without breaking his stride. Sadly, most of the footage we have of Jersey Joe Walcott is from after his decline. Walcott didn't win the heavyweight championship until very late in life, and the majority of the footage we have of him are against three of the best fighters of all time: Lewis, Marciano, and Charles. Walcott lost all of his fights against Marciano and Lewis, even though he usually managed to land several knockdowns. All of which begs the question, just how good was Walcott in his prime if he looked this good against boxing legends at such an advanced age? If the difference between a young Ali and an older Ali is so noticeable, then what did a young Jersey Joe Walcott look like dancing around the ring? Fortunately, Walcott's legacy lives on in the fighters of today, those with the skill and the audacity to pull them off. If you would like to learn more about footwork or head movement, you can check out my best-selling book, Footwork Wins Fights, or pre-order my new book, Aggressive Defense, the head movement, guards, and counters of boxing, kickboxing, and MMA, linked below. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.